Hey, everybody, this is Vince Miller. Welcome back to the Vince Miller Show. Excited to be with you guys. Excited to be with my crew back here as well. We just prayed for you. I want you to know that. So, what do you do in this life when someone wrongs you? How do you feel? How do you respond to it? Maybe it's your spouse, if you're married, who neglected you or something like that. Or maybe it's a coworker who undercut you this week, or a friend who betrayed you, canceled you. I don't know, whatever it is. Deep down, I think when we experience moments like that, we want payback, don't we? I mean, I have felt that way before. You feel vengeance just overwhelm you. You imagine yourself playing out these tapes in your mind because, very simply, you want them to feel the way that you felt. You want your spouse, your friend, your coworker to feel like you felt when they served you up that injustice. So have you ever felt that way? I have. I remember a number of years ago, after my mother died, I went back to San Francisco to essentially take care of her estate. I took care of her home. I sold it. We did her funeral, all that kind of stuff. Then I came back home, and me and my mother kind of had a little bit of a distant relationship. But me and my bio dad had a really distant relationship. I hadn't seen him in many years up to this point. And one day I'm back at home, and I get a call. I get a call from my father, and he has a distinct voice. You can hear mine. It sounds like me. So when he called, he said, "Hey, this is Dad." And I'm like, "Yeah." And I hadn't talked to him in I want to say somewhere close to 25 years or so. And his first remark was, "Hey, heard your mother died." And I said, "Yep," just short answer. And he says, "Well, I need you to know I expect you to pay me back for all the child support and all the alimony because I know you sold the house." And I'm like, I haven't talked to you in 25 years. He clearly is inebriated on the phone. I was really put out by this. And I just said to him, "Dad, do me a favor. Never call here ever again." And I hung up the phone. And I just want you to know that the feeling of vengeance that overwhelmed me in that moment is hard to describe. There was part of me as a pastor was wondering, did I really tackle that situation the right way? And there was the other part of me that was kind of like, I don't really care how you feel right now, because that wasn't the right thing to say to a son you haven't talked to in 25 years. Nor is it ever right or just to call inebriated, or is it ever right and just for you to ask me to pay you back for money that you invested into my mother and your divorce and some of the issues that were related to your past I had nothing to do with. Anyway, it left a wound on me. And I'm going to play out some of that story as we go here, just to tell you how I dealt with it. But I want you to know that feeling of vengeance that wells up in us, those feelings of someone else serving you an injustice that you want to act on yourself to someone else, that's exactly what's happening in Judges chapter 15 today. Samson is wronged. Okay, so one of our judges, he is betrayed and he's handed over, but instead of justice, his anger leads to this escalating revenge. So I think we have a hard time in kind of discerning, what is true justice here and what is vengeance. And I'm just going to tell you the story. It's hard to tell the difference. So let's walk through the story in short real quick. So Samson in the last chapter has an issue with his wife. His wife betrays him. Well, Samson comes back to get his wife, and he's bringing a goat. So essentially he's bringing a yard vacuum to his wife. And, basically he's trying to get back with his wife. Well, he comes back to his wife and discovers that his father-in-law has given his daughter away, his wife away. Well, probably because, maybe his wife betrayed him and he was worried about how Samson was going to respond. So now he's a little angry, all right? He's a little too angry. So Samson burns Philistine crops. And it's quite entertaining how he does it with all these foxes and torches and all that kind of stuff. It's entertaining. Go read it. But anyway, the Philistines get mad at him, so they retaliate by killing his ex-wife and his father-in-law. Okay, so maybe Samson isn't too angry about this, but then Samson strikes back again, killing many of them. And then Samson's people, his own people, realize that this is just continues to escalate like two boys in an argument, right? So Samson's people offer Samson as a peace offering. They tie him up. Then, as he's tied up and given back over to the Philistines, he breaks free, and then he unleashes destruction with a donkey jawbone that he grabs with his hand. Okay, so this is like the movie Walking Tall all over again. He grabs a baseball bat and he goes and beats the crap out of everybody. Okay, so that's essentially what happens here in chapter 15. And by the time, I'm serious, by the time you get to the end, the lines between justice and vengeance are blurred. You don't even as I read the story, it's hard to tell if Samson is delivering Israel or just acting in personal vengeance. And I want to be honest with you, there are times that this happens in our life that we act to pay back and it doesn't turn out real well. Well, if you're dealing with today some injustice in your life, you know, how you walk this line between vengeance and justice is important. And so today I'm going to walk you through that a little bit to maybe help us to see how we can do that. So back to my story. So in my story, what happened next was, you know, I hang up on my dad and I'm wondering if I'm going to do the right thing. So I decide I'm going to write my father a letter. And I'm going to let him have a little piece of my mind because, I mean, I want you to know, I was out there mowing the lawn, picked up the phone, and all of a sudden just I'm overwhelmed by all kinds of different thoughts. You know, one side I hear the devil and an angel on my shoulder speaking back and forth to me all the time, and I'm just trying to figure out how to navigate it. So I decided to write him a letter, and I got about 2 pages into this letter where I was just so exhausted I decided to take a break. And I told a couple of my friends what had happened, and so one of my friends who was a lawyer at the time, many years older than me, said, "Hey, would you be willing to share that letter with me?" And I said, "Sure." So here's what we did. I typed up the letter and I printed it off and I handed it to my friend. And he said, "Great." He said, "Let me read it over and I'll tell you what I think and then we'll meet and talk about it." And so we got together at this breakfast joint about a week later after he had looked it over. And, you know, he's a typical lawyer. He's got my notes out on the table like this, and he's got his hands on the table. And we sat down to meet for breakfast, and he says, "Okay, so I read through your letter. It was good, Vince." He says, "I made some notes on here, just some things to think about." And then he did the lawyer thing where he passes it across the table to me. And he says, "I don't want you to read it right now. Take it home, read it, look at my comments, and then if you don't mind, make some adjustments to it. And then we could talk about it again." So I did. I took it home and I read it. And I was like, okay, there's all these red marks all over it, you know, and I read his comments and I made some adjustments and I sent it back to him in like an hour after I got home. And I expected him to reply right away, and he holds on to it for a few days. And then he sends me an email, says, "Let's meet again." So we go back to the restaurant again. All right. Same restaurant in the morning, eat breakfast. He's doing the same lawyer thing. Okay. So he's got the paper under his hands. And he says, "Vince, thanks for making the corrections. I just want you to know I made a few more." And he pushed it back across the table at me. He said, "Don't read it now. Take it home and read it and then send it back to me and we'll see where it goes." So I took it home and I realized, man, now I've got more red comments all over this thing. And I was like, boy, what are we doing here? You know? And I made some changes to the document, and all of a sudden I began to learn what we were doing here. So I sent it back to him. About a week later, we go through the same process. Third time, we're back at breakfast again. He's got the paper under his table and he's holding it under his hands here. And he says, "Vince, thanks for making all those corrections. Do you understand why we made those corrections?" And I said, "Yeah, you know, some of it was my tone, my posture, how I was saying it, what I needed to say, what I felt like he needed to hear." And we kind of worked through all that. And he says, "Good." He says, "Because I'm going to keep this one. And I'm going to ask you to destroy the one on your computer because you know that your father's not going to listen to this. You needed to do this for you." That was powerful for me, I want you to know. I'm so glad that my friend did this with me because I learned a powerful lesson about how we ruminate on vengeance and what it does to us and how it causes us to act. And these are many of the same lessons I have learned here in Judges chapter 15. So let me give you a few of those lessons that I learned in my life and that I think are also repeated and thus learned from Judges chapter 15. Number one is this: revenge multiplies and justice limits. Revenge multiplies and justice limits. I mean, think about this just for a second. Samson's need for retaliation led to more and more and more and more retaliation. It led to thousands dead. Now, we know that God wanted to deal with the Philistines. But I don't know if God wanted to deal with it exactly in this way, through a hateful vengeance of Samson. I mean, this moment to me feels like two men that keep escalating an argument. You know, one starts by saying something bad about somebody else, and then someone serves up a bad word, and then the other person retaliates by cursing worse, and then the other person begins to throw a punch, and then pretty soon they pull out weapons and they're fighting with each other. And this is a problem in our life, because I really truly believe that when we act in vengeance, that it always raises the stakes. That's what vengeance does. In fact, in the Old Testament, there was a principle to bring a stop to the escalation of vengeance. Do you know what it was? It's called the principle of lex talionis. And you know it. It's the principle of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. So in other words, this little principle of lex talionis was a principle of not extending judgment that is worse than the crime against us. In other words, if someone takes an eye, you can take an eye, but not more than an eye, not two eyes. If someone takes a tooth, you can take a tooth, but not two teeth, right? And it's to ensure that the punishment for the crime doesn't exceed the injustice of the offense. Because guess what? Injustice always tempts us, even the righteous, to act unjustly, and to up the ante a little bit, to up the scales of injustice, to take more than was taken from us. And this is what causes wars in our world, and division in our churches, and issues in our marriage, and issues with our kids. It's just we keep redrawing the lines over and over and over again. So today, one of my questions to you, if you're dealing with an injustice today, is to consider, where am I escalating conflict instead of restraining it? Where am I escalating conflict instead of restraining it? Am I turning the volume down? So the second thing that I notice here is that really we have to remember that vengeance is always personal and justice is always impartial. Revenge is personal and justice is impartial. You know, when I get into an argument or an issue that hurts me personally, I tend to think about that issue only personally. And then I don't turn on reason in my mind and think about, how can I act impartially? I'm just going to confess, I think the place where I didn't do this really well was with my kids when they were younger, especially, you know, those ages between, I would say, around 8 to about 34. So, you know, somewhere in those younger teen ages, though, because there were times that they did things that I told them not to do, that they were always pushing the line. And because I was so hurt by what they were doing, and that they didn't listen, I would tend to respond with emotion, rather than having an impartial mind toward what has happened. I can think of one moment in particular. I had just gotten a new car, and we had another car, and both were, you know, parked in the garage, and I'm pulling in, and this car that we had, it was a Volkswagen Touareg. It had back doors on it that were very spring loaded. And so it was me driving, my wife in the front seat, and my 3 kids in the back. And I told one of my kids in the back seat to be careful when you open the car door, because it kind of springs open. And the Touareg had a point on the door in the back, like it was a really, really sharp point on the door. I don't know why they made the car that way. Anyway, I told Grant, just hold onto the door to make sure it doesn't spring open because you don't want to ding my car. And that's exactly what he did. He sprung the car door open and it put this ding, I mean, a really sharp ding in my driver door on my car. And I remember I told him not to do it, and he did it anyway. It just slipped out of his hands. And I'm like, I was boiling. I was boiling in the front seat. I didn't say anything to him, but I was boiling. My wife looks at me and goes, oh my goodness. So no kidding. I had to like count to 10, bite my tongue. I mean, do everything to restrain myself. I got out of the car and just went into the house angry. I was super angry. So mad about that. Well, guess what? The next day, the same thing happens, exact same situation. I turn to my son again and I say, please be careful when you open the car. Don't let it go this time. And no kidding, same thing happens. Bink, right on the side of my door again. Two right next to each other, two dings in the car right there. And this time I'm boiling over again. I'm just like, what in the living world? Now, did I act in injustice toward my son in that moment? No, I didn't do anything stupid, but I just remember the feeling. And I want you to know that those feelings are sometimes hard to restrain. It was hard for me. I mean, I was biting down on my tongue so hard, I think I made it bleed. I mean, it was like, it was awful. And for 5 years, I had to look at the dings in the door and be reminded of my own anger too. That personal feeling of injustice that wanted and almost caused me to act in vengeance. But I think I learned a powerful lesson by looking at those two little dings in my door for 5 years, is that we have to slow ourselves down to really act impartially and to be just. I mean, Samson in this story does nothing that sounds like true justice to me. It's just vengeance, full of emotion. I mean, Samson burns their fields, kills Philistines out of pure emotion. And so it's hard to see how Samson's actions were heroic here because it's so clouded by all this emotion and vengeance. And, you know, Samson did a lot of things that led to this moment too. He made a lot of reckless choices that got him here. First off, he married a Philistine woman, which his parents told him not to. And then she betrayed him because he gave over some of the hidden secrets. And then he returns to reclaim her with a goat and was rejected by his father-in-law. And then Samson lashes out unregulated in anger to all these people. And I think it was right for Samson to lean into some of these things. I'm not saying that injustice wasn't, committed against him, but he just unregulated emotion led to hurt that was weaponized against other people. And that's all I tend to see in this text is unregulated emotion that led to death. And I want you to know that I do this too. When we make things personal, we reason with emotion, not with this up here and not with this down here. And instead of leaning on the Spirit of truth to guide us through truth, into truth, by allowing God's word to regulate our lives, then it doesn't look like God's justice. It looks like our justice, and that gets clouded. And then we turn these things into personal vendettas against other people, and it wounds them. And not only that, it wounds them and leaves scars that sometimes last forever. The things that we say, the things that we do, the ways we behave, they hurt and sting, and they leave scars on other people that cause them to act in the same way. So my big question for you today is this, are you seeking payback to just satisfy yourselves, or are you seeking what honors God? Don't seek payback from people from something that happened to you. Seek God's justice. Regarding my father now, back to the little letter I wrote with my lawyer friend, I'm really glad that I did go home and destroy that letter. I kind of questioned it when I was about to push delete on the screen there and on that file. because there was part of me that kind of wanted to hang on to it and come back to it time and time again. But I'm so glad I let go of it, because that moment was a moment of powerful forgiveness. I was able to reconcile my emotions, which is really hard to do when we feel vengeance. But because my lawyer friend helped me to kind of process my emotions over days and weeks, I came to terms with what was going on in my heart and what my father had done to me. And it caused me to then regulate my emotions against the truth of God. And then in that also to learn to forgive, which was really hard to do, because it's so much easier to act in vengeance than to do the hard thing and really forgive, and then to seek justice God's way. You know, today I want you to imagine that relationship that maybe that you're thinking about, where you feel like you want to land a blow, a payback, rather than seek godly justice. I want you to imagine. I want you to imagine what would happen if you did seek out revenge. Yeah, how you would feel in a moment in time, but the ramifications of all that in your life and others. And then I want you to think about, what would it look like for you to forgive and to really seek godly justice God's way? Because when we do it God's way, wrongs are confronted, not with vengeance. And you know what that is? That's refreshing, isn't it? And we got to walk that fine line in our life with people that have hurt us and wounded us, and reconcile the wounds and learn how to forgive. And this is what is so crazy about Jesus. I really want you to hear this. Jesus was the only true innocent sufferer. We suffer because of sin, right? Sometimes we suffer because of our sin or other people's sin. And sometimes just because we think that we're suffering for someone else's sin, we think that we are an innocent sufferer. But there is no point in this life we are truly an innocent sufferer. The only one was Jesus Christ. He was perfect, died innocent, an unjust death. But look at the way he handled that. He didn't act with vengeance. What he did was deal with the root cause. He dealt with the sin of all humanity. So follow the way of Jesus. See how he thought about injustice. See how he dealt with it. And he sought to even forgive those who served him an injustice, so much so that he died for them. He gave his life as a sacrifice. That's powerful. And guess what? That's hard to do. So I want you to know that there's a better path than revenge. Today, just maybe take some practical steps. If you feel vengeance, pause before you react. And maybe acknowledge the hurt in yourself, like my lawyer friend helped me to acknowledge in me. Consult God's word a little bit more, and then take some gradual steps towards peace. You may not be ready to take a leap in with a full frontal sacrifice of your life for that person, but you can take some steps toward peace. And let's begin to let go of some of that rage and that vengeance that burns in our hearts, and find a better way to restore and reconcile the issues of our life, first from within and then from without. Let me pray for you today. God, we've all been hurt in some way right now. Like literally right now, we're probably thinking about that person that has served us an injustice. And as we've worked through this lesson, maybe we've discovered that we need to approach that situation differently. God, help us to understand that very next step, to take it immediately. God, we want to acknowledge that we have been hurt and that the other person doesn't understand it. But you've got a way for us, and we're going to live our lives like Jesus. We're going to take steps toward peace and sacrifice rather than vengeance and retaliation. We commit this to you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Well, make that hard decision today. I know it's hard. Love you guys. If this has blessed you, share it. And I'll see you back here next time. Live all in for him who lived all in for you.